Well, this is a video about the difference between comparative advantage and absolute advantage. Everything we've done so far, we started out with a model where we had each country had an absolute advantage in a particular good. So this was our wheat and tomatoes example for the US and Mexico. You can see that the US takes less time to make wheat than Mexico does, and Mexico takes less time to make tomatoes than the US does. So it was very easy to tell who should sell what to whom, and it seemed obvious that there should be a basis for trade. It doesn't always work out that well. This model, of course, was first described by Adam Smith, so this is the model associated with Adam Smith. But then what about situations where one country is better at everything? And this model was first described by David Ricardo, a brilliant economist. And so here's a comparative advantage case. So we have the United Kingdom and France trading wine and cheese. So we've got hours of labor. Maybe this could be bottles of wine. So for various reasons, the UK is not very good at making wine, and it takes 5 hours to make a bottle of wine in the UK. And we could say pounds of cheese. It takes 2 hours to make a pound of cheese in the UK, and France is better at everything. It only takes an hour to make a bottle of wine in France, and it only takes an hour to make a pound of cheese in France. So if we were going on an absolute advantage model, we might conclude that there was no basis of trade because France is better at everything. And that turns out not to be true. In fact, that turns out to be not important at all, actually. Not important for this. It actually turns out to be important for wages in the two countries, but that's another story. But all that matters for trade to take place is to figure out whether opportunity costs differ between the two countries. So it doesn't matter that the UK is bad at everything in this example. And so let's just check the opportunity costs between France and the UK. So in the UK, if you want to make wine, it takes 5 hours to make a bottle of wine. So in the course of making one bottle of wine, we'll have to call that W because we don't want wine, we don't want to get confused with the wheat. One bottle of wine takes 5 hours, and so in order to free up enough labor from the cheese industry to have enough labor employed in the wine industry to make one bottle of wine, you can see that we would need to give up 2.5 pounds of cheese in the UK. And then in France, if we wanted to make a bottle of wine, you can see that that would take an hour, and that would cause cheese production to fall by a pound of cheese. So we would conclude that the opportunity cost of wine is lower in France because 1 is less than 2.5. And then you might think, oh well, what about the other good? Well, it turns out, of course, the opportunity cost of the other good is just the reciprocal of the opportunity cost of wine. So what you know about reciprocals, if 1 is smaller than 2.5, then the reciprocal of 2.5 is going to be smaller than 1. So I mean, we'll just say that. We'll just spell all that out if you want. So this is the opportunity cost of cheese. So 1 cheese in the UK is equal to 2/5 of a wine. And then for France, 1 cheese equals 1 wine. And you can see that obviously because they are reciprocals, this is less than the opportunity cost of cheese is less in the UK. So because opportunity cost differs, the UK has a comparative advantage in in cheese, has a comparative advantage in cheese because it has a lower opportunity cost of cheese. But an absolute advantage in nothing. It doesn't matter. As long as opportunity costs differ, there is a basis for trade. And you might think, well, what's the point of being France? And I think your book has some mention of this, but essentially the nice thing about being France, this is a barter world. So when you get done at the end of a long day at the wine or the cheese factory, you get to take home what you made. And in France, where people are using little labor to make these goods, they end up with higher wages than the UK. But we will have a basis for trade, and both countries will be better off. You can draw PPFs for the France UK example if you like by yourself. If you want to, you can scan them and attach them to an email, and I'll look at them for you to see if they're right. You can try this example yourself. You can draw PPFs. You can postulate a feasible world price you'll have to pick something in between. For wine, of course, you'll have to pick something in between one wine equals one cheese and one wine equals 2.5 cheeses. So to be easy on yourself, you could pick two. One wine equals two cheese. That's feasible. You could draw a trade line, and you could go through the exercises that we did for absolute advantage. But absolute advantage is something of a red herring. It's sort of like a thing in the plot that is put there to confuse you. Absolute advantage really doesn't matter. It only matters that countries have a comparative advantage, and that occurs when opportunity costs differ. The only odd example where you really wouldn't have a basis for trade would be if it happened to be the case that opportunity cost happened to be identical in the two countries. But that's the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage.